Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much to the Cambridge Area Bus Users Group for inviting me to speak. It may seem a little bit odd to you that I've come to speak about light rail. What's that got to do with buses? Through my presentation, I hope I will show some of the connections, but I think there's a very important question that both the previous speakers mentioned in their presentations, and Ross said congestion is killing Cambridge, and then Gary said, how do we fix it? And really that's what Cambridge Connect is about. It's recognising that congestion is a major problem in the city, and we need to think about ways in which we can address that in the future. So in my presentation, I'm clearly going to give emphasis to one particular option for addressing that problem, and that is light rail, and I'll explain why we think light rail is a viable option, and also we think it's the right option. And then I'll kind of walk you through the rationale behind that. Before I start though, a little bit about my background. I run a small business in Cambridge. It's an environmental consultancy. So a lot of my professional life is about sustainability and environmental management. And quite a big part of that is spatial planning. And I set up Cambridge Connect 3.5 years ago out of concern as a citizen for what was happening in Cambridge and how we might approach those problems. In particular, at the time it was the city deal that caused me a lot of concern about some of the suggestions for solutions that they were coming up with. And so I felt I could either just complain about it or I could try and develop something which was positive as an alternative for people to consider and put that out there for people to think about. So very early on in that initiative, I found there was a lot of common ground with several organisations, in particular Rail Future, and also UK Tram, both of which are UK-wide organisations representing the interests of the rail industry and the light rail industry. I'll put my hand up and say I have not had a lot of contact with the bus users group in the past. I mean, I'm sure I've interacted with many of you as individuals, but not as a group. So I'm very pleased to receive the invitation to talk here today, because I think it's building that bridge, and I think that's really good. Right, so I always think it's a good idea to start with the question, why? Why is this a problem, and why are we putting forward solutions as we are? What is the nature of the problem? The traditional wisdom is that Cambridge is a small market town in the middle of East Anglia. Not a lot happening here. There's a few academics, but it's a sleepy little market town with not a lot happening, basically. And that may have been true 20 years ago, and I came here 25 years ago as a student, and the city really was very different to what it is today. And what's driving this change is growth. The growth has been quite phenomenal, and all the evidence points to the fact that that growth is going to continue and indeed probably accelerate over the next 10 to 20 years. And if you think about that in itself, it means that we've got to think differently about how we approach the problem of growth. And in fact, it's playing out in the form of congestion as that's the expression of these pressures. So what's changed? Well, it's really about the business growth, and that is actually a success. It's built on the back of the university. and the science and technology strengths of this region, and that's fantastic. And we really should be proud of that, and we should, in many respects, we should encourage that. But with that kind of development, and huge investment is being put into this region. In fact, by one figure from Cambridge Ahead, the turnover in economic terms in Cambridge is as much as the city of Manchester. So I think you need to look at Cambridge differently to being this little small market town. This brings huge challenges for us as citizens, for the politicians who have to try and manage that growth and deliver services. It has potential implications for our quality of life. And for me, the environment is an extremely important part of that quality of life. And I always come back to the question of sustainability. How do we manage things in a way that is sustainable for the future? So this is a picture of the south of Cambridge. Don't worry about the writing, you probably can't read that. But it's the biomedical campus, huge growth there. Unfortunately, the transport infrastructure has not kept pace, and it has got serious issues which need to be addressed. And on the north side of the city, we've got the development of the West Campus and the new town of Edington, which has approximately 5,000 new homes, including student places, in that city, or in that town. So that just indicates some of the growth. Of course, there's massive developments going on all around in the periphery of Cambridge. In fact, the growth in the periphery is projected through to 2031 to be about 33% above 2011 levels. And within the city itself, it's about 20%. So this has implications for our transport infrastructure, clearly. And I did a little bit of just a simple calculation of, well, what's the current situation in relation to buses coming into Cambridge? And just looking at the timetable in 2018, at peak time, that is in the morning, there was roughly 125 buses scheduled to come into the city per hour, most of which are going to either Drum Street or to Bridge Street. However, if we think about that growth and project ahead and think about, well, how many would we need in 2031 to service that population that's going to be here in 2031? And this is a fairly simple calculation, but broadly speaking, you're going to have to double to triple that number of buses coming in to serve the population with the same sort of service. And that's a function, in part, with the capacity of buses. They can hold up to 70 people on a double-decker. So the more people, you need more buses. I was very concerned about the implications of that for our quality of life and for the city centre. The City Deal solution 3 years ago was to build more busways, bring more buses into the city centre, and that was seen as the way forward. So I questioned that and did a lot of work a couple of years ago, really trying to persuade people that we need to think differently. Fortunately, in my opinion, we are now thinking differently. Since I started the Cambridge Connect initiative, the Combined Authority has been set up. That was established in 2017. Central government set that up. And their responsibility includes strategic planning for transport infrastructure in the region. And very quickly, within the first year of being established, they undertook to do what they call a mass transit options study. And they combined with the Cambridge Greater Partnership to do this study. They commissioned Steer Davies Gleave, transport consultants, to look at all of the options that could possibly address this problem going forward. And Steer Davies Lee in 2018 published this report, and they came to the conclusion that there was really three main options on the table for addressing this level of growth going forward. And that was bus rapid transit, a concept known as affordable very rapid transit, or we called it the bullet bus. This was a concept from John Miles from the University of Cambridge, Professor of Engineering, quite futuristic, involved a lot of tunnelling. And then there was our proposal, which was also considered as part of that options assessment. And the study concluded that, yes, mass transit is going to be needed in the long term because of the growth. Secondly, tunnels are going to be needed in a practical sense under the core of the city centre, both to protect this inner city heritage, but also to facilitate the movement of the numbers of people involved. We've got to remember also the tourist numbers is actually quite high. There's 7 million tourists come to Cambridge every year, so that's part of the issue. We need to connect out to the regions because all of this growth is not just happening in the city, it's actually happening in the periphery. And we need to link that up, partly to do with affordability of housing. The conclusion of the report was, not my conclusion, but they said that the Cambridge Connect network that we proposed was the best network that was currently on the table. However, they did, they also came to the conclusion that bus rapid transit was not going to have the capacity to meet the needs over the 10 to 20 year time horizon. They concluded that ADRT was not going to be, it was really too far in the future and it didn't have the right attributes in terms of the network. So they concluded that light rail was the best solution technically for the future. However, they did conclude that light rail was unaffordable. And they assessed the cost of light rail at being $4.5 billion for a network which actually extends right out into the periphery, and I'll explain that in a minute. And that was considerably more than what we had projected. We projected about 3.5 for the entire network. So they said, well, okay, what do? We need to find a fix to this problem if we want to sustain our environment and growth. So can we deliver something much cheaper but give the same transport benefits? And that's where they came up with this thing called CAM. Has everybody heard of CAM? No? Okay. Well, that's interesting because the CAM, as it's been dubbed, stands for Cambridgeshire Autonomous Metro. And I'll run through what it is, but before I do, I'll just draw a distinction or explain what is light rail and how does that relate to tram, because many of you kind of will have heard these terms, but you won't really understand quite why they're different. In fact, a tram vehicle and a light rail vehicle is absolutely identical. You can put them on the same, different tracks, same vehicle, but in the context where the vehicle is travelling on a segregated way, completely separate from other traffic, that's known as light rail. Whereas when it's sharing road space with other vehicles and pedestrians and cyclists, then it's known as a tram. We're proposing light rail, i.e. totally segregated, apart from possibly in one or two areas. So these are examples. In Nottingham, it's a hybrid between both light rail and tram. In the city, it actually shares road space, so it's a tram there, but then in the countryside, it's out on a segregated way, so it's actually light rail. The Docklands Light Railway is fully segregated, so it's totally light rail. And Manchester is also a bit of a hybrid. So this question of affordability is very important if you're wanting to implement something practically. It does need to be affordable. And there's a point in the curve where the light rail or tram option actually becomes more affordable because of the numbers of people involved. And this graph illustrates where that crossover is. Broadly speaking, it's between 2,000 to 3,000 people per hour travelling on the service on a particular route. I'm going to skip this because time is marching on. But broadly speaking, the projections are that the numbers of people, certainly in the next 5 years and going forward to 10 years, will actually more than exceed that threshold of where light rail makes sense. So the network model that we have extends out to St Ives, to St Neots, to Haverhill, to Waterbeach, and to as far as Mildenhall. And this is a long-term plan. It's looking 10, 15 to 20 years ahead. Within the city, as I said, it would have tunnels. They would be as short as possible, and we've calculated it would be about 6 kilometres of tunnelling. I'm going to just skip over that because I want to get to the section at the end where we talk about CAM. And the cost, broadly speaking, as I said, was about £3.5 billion, which is a huge amount of money. But think about it, the A14 upgrade at the moment is costing £1.7 billion. So these are the sorts of figures that you need to talk about if you want to do something transformative. So the CAM proposal, which has been proposed by the Combined Authority and the Greater Cambridge Partnership, is essentially a vehicle of this nature. It kind of looks like a tram, but it's not. It is a bus. It is a rubber-tired bus, which has been got a skin on it that looks a bit like a tram. So in some respects, it has some attributes a bit like a tram, wide doors, but it does not operate on a rail. This is the network that the Combined Authority have proposed for the CAM, and it's very similar to what we've proposed. Exception being that they would only have one stop in the city centre, and they'd have 12 kilometres of tunnelling. I'm just going to skip that too. This CAM was actually proposed 20 years ago, but it never got off the ground. So in 2018, the cost of CAM was assessed as being $1.5 billion, and that sounds brilliant. You know, why wouldn't you? Against light rail, $4.5 billion, it's a bit of a no-brainer, right? However, a year later, in fact, a couple of months ago, they did a more detailed costing, and they actually now say that CAM is going to cost between 3.7 to 4.5 billion. So the numbers, now that I've done a little bit more work, are actually very similar to light rail. And I think this does raise a very serious question. Is CAM actually still a valid model if you've got something like light rail for a similar price? And there's certain reasons why light rail is better, in our opinion. And just in the last month or two, we've been working very closely with some experts in the field, including Amy, who runs Metrolink and DLR. CMS, which is the largest law firm in the UK. We're looking at the legal implications of this type of technology. And Ancura, a management consulting firm in London. And we've been discussing, well, okay, if we compare CAM and light rail together and just line them up on every type of criteria that you'd like to differentiate them, how do they perform? And I won't go into detail here, but in our assessment today, and we're still working on this, light rail wins hands down on just about every count. Part of that is because it's a very proven technology. It's been delivered in hundreds of cities worldwide, and we know it works, basically. So if you're paying the same amount of money and you need a huge investment coming from investors, you need to ensure that you can deliver with low risk. And with CAM, the risks are considerably higher, and there's a big question mark of whether or not investors would be willing to stump up that kind of cash to invest in that. So that's broadly the picture. I haven't really talked about integration of the light rail with the bus services, but clearly light rail is a fixed route. It is a backbone, so to speak, which runs on in particular alignments. So it doesn't, by nature, have the flexibility of buses, and this is where buses and light rail can work in combination. And if you go to cities in mainland Europe, and I'd cite the example of Switzerland, the bus services and the light rail services are all very joined up and integrated. And this question of ticketing, for example, is classic, where the services are actually much more integrated in mainland Europe. And that, in our opinion, is the way we should be moving. So, thank you for your time. I'll take some questions.
Thank you very much for this. Really. Thank you. That's so interesting to hear your viewpoint about. Okay, Charlotte, at the back. Once we've had a few questions here, we'll then bring Ross and Gary back, so we can ask questions of all. Thank you, Charlotte.
Thanks. Councillor Kane from Reach. Very interesting idea. If someone decided to go ahead with it now, when would it be fully operational?
Very good question. Well, if you go with light rail, then you could deliver it within 5 years. And technically, actually in engineering terms, you could build the tunnels in a year. So technically, it's actually quite deliverable within 3 years in engineering terms, but you've got planning processes, legal procedures which have to be gone through, inquiries, public consultation, So it's really a minimum of 5 years for the first line to be operational. In our opinion, it should be a phased process. So you're not going to deliver this all within the next 5 years. It's 100 kilometres of network. Even Manchester only has 100 kilometres of network. So realistically, you're looking at phased delivery over a 10 to 15-year period. And what we should do, in my opinion, is focus on the priorities and identify those in consultation with the public. But probably those priorities are on the axis within the city that link up the west side of the city, the West Campus sort of up to Camborne link, and then on the south side of the city, the biomedical campus is absolutely key, Granta Park, and then eventually Haverhill. And then also in the north towards Waterbeach and the east side of the city as well. Actually, there's something that's happened in the last few weeks, which is a bit of a game changer, and we haven't had time yet to really consider it fully. But Marshall's announced they're moving the airport out of the city.
They'd like to move. So they'd like to move, get it correct. Right. They'd like to move out. Okay. It's got to go through all the applications. Yeah. Okay. So they've got a lot to do.
Okay.
It's early days, but that's 10 years away. But still, it is a very important statement, I think, which has implications for the way all the spatial planning should happen. And as I say, we haven't had time to really consider that yet, but I think it is quite important to keep in mind.
Thank you. Lady in the back.
Hi, I'm Emma Yates from the Association of British Commuters. The Stu Davies-Gleave report was a fantastic rundown, thank you. I understand that it recommends bus franchising. Is that correct? And obviously, on the logic that if the bus system isn't franchised, if it remains deregulated, there'll be that risk of competition if the bus is competing with CAM. And I wondered if you had any comments on that.
I think that's a really interesting question. I don't know about the franchising aspects. In fact, my colleagues from the bus companies, I'm sure, can answer that question. But the question about competition between let's call it the backbone of public transport, it could be light rail or it could be this autonomous bus. I don't know which it will be at this point. But obviously that does raise questions of competition, because the backbone is going to be attracting people to use that as against the bus services on the same, if the bus services were going on the same route. It seems to me that it's pretty clear that if you did have something like the mass transit system in place, a lot of the current bus services would no longer be viable, because people would be taking the better system. But it doesn't say that bus services wouldn't be needed, because you need to connect to that backbone, and as I was explaining, the backbone is actually got a fairly limited reach. It can only serve major corridors. So in my view, the two are complementary rather than in competition. And yes, it would be disruptive. You'd have to change the whole way it worked. But I do see a very important role for buses in the future in integrating with that backbone.
Would you need franchising of necessity, because otherwise the rural areas are probably more likely to be subsidised routes? That leads to an endless cycle of disproportionate funding going out that way. So I just wonder if getting franchising in place might not be a priority for this to succeed, to have one integrated vision from the start.
It's a very good point. And I just have to plead ignorance about franchising here. And I think we should pick up that question in the open discussion when Ross and Gary can probably illuminate better than I am.
And in fact, I think that's right. And I think if that's okay, would Ross and Gary come back to the platform?